May 16, 1943. Somewhere above the dark heart of Germany, a squadron of British bombers sliced through the moonlight, skimming just 60 feet above the ground. So low their wings almost kissed the treetops. In the cockpits, young men gripped the controls, faces ghostly in the glow of their dials. Ahead of them lay one of the most daring missions of the war: destroy the great dams of the Ruhr Valley, the industrial arteries of Nazi Germany, with a weapon that should have been impossible. They were the Dambusters, and their mission was madness: to hurl bombs that bounced on water like skipping stones straight into the concrete hearts of the enemy's empire. Their chances, slim. Their courage, absolute. Tonight, we follow them through invention, terror, triumph, and loss, in the incredible true story of Operation Chastise. The night the floodgates of war were literally blown open. By 1943, Britain was fighting for its life. The war had dragged into its fourth brutal year, and the Allied bombing campaign was grinding, costly, and often ineffective. Germany's war machine, fueled by the factories of the Ruhr Valley, churned out tanks, guns, and ammunition with relentless precision. The Ruhr was the beating industrial heart of Hitler's empire, protected not just by anti-aircraft guns, but by nature itself. Massive reservoirs dammed behind walls of steel and concrete, feeding both water and power to the Reich. If those dams could be destroyed, entire valleys would flood, factories drowned, bridges swept away, transport shattered. But the dams were built to withstand ordinary bombing. Their walls were 100 feet thick, reinforced with concrete and steel. To reach the base of those walls, bombs would need to be dropped with pinpoint precision, at a height no bomber could safely fly. It seemed impossible. Enter Barnes Wallis, an eccentric British engineer with the mind of a dreamer and the patience of a saint. In the quiet of his workshop, surrounded by rulers, pencils, and blueprints, he imagined something new, something mad. What if a bomb could skip across the surface of the water, like a stone across a pond, and then sink directly against the dam before exploding? It would bypass nets, defenses, and impact exactly where the wall was weakest. His colleagues laughed at the idea. His superiors said it couldn't work. But Wallis kept testing, first with marbles and buckets, then with small models, then with full-sized mock-ups dropped from aircraft over English reservoirs. Each failure brought him closer to success. The result was the Upkeep bomb, a 9,000-pound cylinder packed with explosive, designed to spin backwards at 500 revolutions per minute, so it could skip across the surface of the water before slamming into its target. It was genius, it was insane, and it required pilots to fly at night, in total darkness, at just 60 feet above the water, holding a steady course for miles. A suicide mission, disguised as an experiment. But for one squadron of the Royal Air Force, number 617 Squadron, newly formed under a young, hard-nosed leader named Wing Commander Guy Gibson. The impossible was exactly what they'd signed up for. They were about to fly into history. The men of 617 Squadron gathered in the briefing room at RAF Scampton, the air thick with cigarette smoke and nerves. Maps of Germany covered the walls, rivers, valleys, and 3 bold red circles marking the targets: the Merhen, Edda, and Sorp dams. At the front stood Wing Commander Guy Gibson, 24 years old, a veteran of over 170 missions, with the composure of a man twice his age. His voice was calm, clipped, almost detached, the kind of tone that made fear feel like an inconvenience. "This," he said, pointing to the Merhen Dam, "is our main target. Break this and you break the Ruhr." Around him, young faces watched in silence. Pilots barely out of school, navigators, gunners, engineers. They had trained for weeks, flying low over English lakes, practicing in darkness so black they could see only the moonlight glinting off the waves. They'd learned to hold their aircraft at exactly 60 feet, no higher, no lower, using spotlights angled to form a perfect figure 8 on the water's surface. Too low and they'd crash, too high and the bomb would fail to bounce. Now they knew what that training had been for.
All the best.
Outside,
Steady.
the modified Avro Lancaster bombers waited on the runway, sleek, monstrous machines, with their bomb bays cut open to hold the strange spinning cylinders.
Everything balanced.
Mechanics moved among them like ghosts in the dusk, tightening bolts, checking propellers. The crews climbed aboard, each aircraft bearing its own call sign, AJA, AJG, AJL, names that would soon be written into legend. Barnes Wally stood on the tarmac, watching. The man who dreamed this weapon into existence was racked with guilt. He knew what the mission would cost. He had built something extraordinary and sent young men to risk their lives proving it worked. At 9:28 p.m. the first engines roared to life. The ground trembled. Gibson's voice crackled over the radio. Let's go. 19 bombers lifted into the night, their propellers cutting through the still air like the drumbeat of destiny. Below them, England faded into darkness. Ahead, 500 miles of enemy territory, radar stations, and death. Operation Chastise had begun. The bombers flew in formation across the channel, barely 50 feet above the waves, so low that the salt spray licked at their fuselages. The moon hung pale and indifferent, casting a ghostly sheen over the sea. Inside each cockpit, the men could see their own reflections trembling in the glass, young, focused, mortal. Gibson led from the front in Lancaster AJG. Behind him, the others followed like shadows stitched to his wake. Their path was treacherous, not a high-altitude cruise over safety, but a deadly slalom through valleys, treetops, and radar nets. Every minute, a misstep could mean fiery death. The first casualty came quickly. Over the Dutch coast, Flight Lieutenant Bill Estelle's plane, AJB, was caught in a burst of flak. The Lancaster erupted into a rolling inferno, its fiery wreck painting the sea orange before vanishing beneath the waves. Gibson heard the report in his headset, static, a scream, then silence. No time to mourn, they pressed on. For those who survived the crossing, the land rose up to meet them, fields, rivers, church spires flashing by in seconds. They flew under power lines, over sleeping towns, their bombers so low that the downdraft scattered laundry from clotheslines. At one point, Flight Lieutenant Hopgood, one of Gibson's closest friends, nearly clipped a treetop. His gunner shouted in terror, the plane shuddered and then steady again. Hopgood laughed over the radio. Still with you, Gibby. But beneath the bravado, they all knew the truth. This was flying on a razor's edge. Hours later, the German countryside fell away into a black void, a vast mirror of water reflecting the stars. The Merhen Dam, their first target. Gibson's heart pounded. From 60 feet up, the massive wall of concrete looked like a sleeping giant, ancient and invincible. Searchlights swept the sky. Anti-aircraft guns bristled along the shore. One hit, and any of them would be torn apart before they reached bombing range. He opened the intercom. Okay, lads, this is it. At 12:28 a.m., Gibson pushed his bomber into the attack run. His crew adjusted the altimeter, 60 feet. Bombs spinning, 500 revolutions per minute. Speed, 232 miles per hour. The dam loomed closer, its towers clawing up from the darkness. Gibson held the line. Flak burst around them in orange blossoms. The Lancaster jolted, alarms shrieked. Steady, steady. Release. The bomb dropped, skipping across the water. 1, 2, 3 perfect bounces. Then struck the dam's wall and sank. Seconds later, the explosion thundered up from below, sending a column of water hundreds of feet into the air. When the spray cleared, the dam still stood. Hopgood came in next, flying AJM. Flak tore through his aircraft, riddling it with holes. He held his course, calm, defiant. The bomb released, bounced once, then the Lancaster exploded midair. Gibson watched helplessly as flaming debris rained into the lake. Hopgood and his men were gone. The next planes came in, one after another, Martin, Maltby, Shannon, Knight, each carving a path through the storm of fire, each bomber heartbeat in the night. Then at 12:56 a.m., Maltby's bomb struck true. The lake erupted in a roar that shook the heavens. Cracks raced through the dam's surface like veins of lightning. Then, with a sound like the tearing of the earth itself, the Merhen Dam broke apart. A wall of water surged forward, 300 million tons unleashed, racing down the valley with the fury of creation itself. Villages were swept away in minutes. Bridges, factories, and power stations vanished beneath the torrent. In the air above, Gibson and the survivors circled in stunned silence. The impossible had been done, but their night was far from over. 2 more dams still stood, and dawn was coming. The hunters of the dark turned their bombers north, into the waiting guns of the Edda Valley. The valley of the Edda River was shrouded in fog, a serpentine gorge twisting through the German hills. The dam itself was harder to hit than the Merhen, hemmed in by cliffs and forests. To strike it, the pilots had to dive into a ravine, skim over the treetops, level out for a few precious seconds, then pull up violently before slamming into the rock walls beyond. It was flying at the edge of madness. Gibson circled overhead, his bomber ghosting through the mist like a vulture searching for prey. His remaining crews followed, tired, shaken, but relentless. They had seen friends die, seen the impossible achieved, and still the mission burned inside them. Flight Lieutenant David Shannon was the first to attempt the run. He plunged his Lancaster into the valley, engines screaming, the cliff faces sliding by so close that his wingtips nearly scraped stone. The bomb was released perfectly, 1, 2, 3 skips, and then the flash of impact. A plume of white water soared skyward, followed by silence. The dam still stood. Next came Henry Maudsley, one of the youngest. He was calm, focused, but his bomb struck the parapet of the dam and exploded instantly. His aircraft was torn apart. No parachutes. Gibson clenched his jaw. Every success tonight was written in blood. Finally, Leslie Knight lined up his approach. He descended into the gorge so low that his wheels brushed the river mist. His voice came through the radio, steady, measured, as though death itself were merely an inconvenience. Going in. The bomb fell true. A second later, the mountain roared. The Edda Dam cracked open like an egg, and a tidal wave burst forth, glowing silver in the moonlight. Entire forests bent beneath the rush, villages drowned in seconds, and miles downstream, German workers were jolted awake by a sound they thought was the end of the world. Gibson watched from above, awe and sorrow mixing in his chest. The Merhen and the Edda were gone. The Sorp still stood, but it no longer mattered. The Ruhr, the industrial heart of Hitler's war machine, had been struck a mortal blow. But victory was not without its ghosts. Of the 19 bombers that left England, 8 would never return. 53 men lost to the dark. As Gibson turned for home, the sun was beginning to rise over Europe, pale gold spilling across the wreckage below. From his cockpit, he could see the rivers swelling with unleashed fury, and he knew that the floodwaters carried more than destruction. They carried the proof of what courage, ingenuity, and sheer human audacity could do when bound together by purpose. Hours later, as the surviving crews landed back at RAF Scampton, the airfield erupted in cheers. The exhausted men stumbled from their aircraft, greeted by their comrades, mechanics, and commanders. Gibson, his uniform soaked with sweat and oil, refused to celebrate. They were all magnificent, he said quietly, every last one of them. That night, the press would call them heroes. The king would bestow honors. And yet, behind every medal gleamed the memory of those who never came back. Hopgood, Maudsley, Estelle, and so many others. The dams were broken, but so too were the hearts of those who'd survived to see them fall. And somewhere, over the quiet fields of Lincolnshire, the night echoed with the ghosts of their engines, still flying, still defying the impossible. Operation Chastise would become legend, a story of brilliance and bravery, of invention and sacrifice. The Dambusters proved that even in the darkest hours of war, the human spirit could still rise and strike with the precision of a miracle. In the days that followed, reconnaissance planes flew over the Ruhr Valley, capturing a site that defied comprehension. Craters the size of cities, valleys turned to seas, steelworks drowned beneath muddy torrents. The destruction was vast. Power plants knocked out, bridges torn apart, railways swallowed whole. For a brief, brilliant moment, German industry staggered to a halt, but the triumph was bittersweet. The same water that crippled Hitler's war machine also consumed the lives of thousands of civilians and forced laborers, Poles, Frenchmen, Dutchmen, all swept away in the roaring floods. The line between victory and tragedy blurred, and even the victors couldn't escape the weight of that truth. Back in Britain, Wing Commander Guy Gibson was hailed as a national hero. At Buckingham Palace, King George VI pinned the Victoria Cross to his chest, the highest award for valor. Yet Gibson's eyes, dark and haunted, betrayed no joy. He'd lost too many men to celebrate. The Dambusters had achieved the impossible, but the cost had carved something hollow in his soul. The operation became legend almost instantly. The world marveled at the bouncing bomb, at the precision flying that defied physics and fear. Hollywood would later turn it into myth, with roaring engines and triumphant fanfare. But the real story, the human story, was quieter, sadder, more profound. It was about men who flew into darkness with no guarantee of return, who gambled everything on a single night's chance to shift the course of history. They were engineers and dreamers, mathematicians and pilots, all converging in that sliver of time when faith in ingenuity could move mountains, or, in this case, break dams. In the decades after the war, when veterans gathered at reunions, they spoke less of destruction and more of the feeling, that perfect, terrifying union of purpose. One pilot would say, "It was as though the sky itself had become an ally." And as for Gibson, his story would end too soon, shot down over Holland in 1944, another name among the fallen. But his legacy endured. Every time a pilot took off into the night, every time a mission seemed impossible, his ghost flew with them, calm, steady, unflinching. The Dambusters Raid remains one of the most daring feats in aviation history, a symphony of courage and sacrifice, of water, steel, and willpower. In the dark hours of May 1943, 19 crews took to the sky. Only 11 came back, but together they proved something timeless, that even when surrounded by shadow, humanity can still create light, not by what it destroys, but by what it dares to attempt. Their story doesn't just belong to history. It belongs to every dreamer who's ever faced the impossible and gone anyway.